Hello, welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Bob Scarborough.
And we are the FAIRtax Guys with our usual Rubik's Cube and our scrolling banner there.
Thought you were going to bring that gold single colored cube out.
This one, the one when I tell people I've got a cube that's the same color on all six sides and I bet you can't solve it. And they look at me kind of funny and say, huh? And I scramble this thing up. You see, the pieces are different sizes and shapes.
All right.
So when you go to scramble this thing up, it is no longer a cube. And you have to identify pieces by size and shape and not by color. And that's a little more difficult. And so I make believers out of folks really quick that it's actually harder to solve this one that's the same color on all six sides than it is any of the other ones I've got.
If you're listening on the radio or listening on one of the podcast channels, you need to go check out the video on YouTube, Facebook, or Rumble to see what Bob Paxton was talking about there. It's like a transparency issue with the Internal Revenue Service. They tell you that things are going to get easier because they're going to paint everything the same color or something's going to happen. It's still just confusing and down and confounding as it ever was, and probably.
We'll be going through chapter 14 of the FAIRtax book a little bit later today. Income tax or IRS outrages. Boortz and Linder have got some pretty good IRS outrage stories to get to. But actually, one other little quick order of business here before we get into the program. We have got our date where I'm going to fly up to North Carolina. We will do our FAIRtax Power Radio show live on WTOB Sunday morning, October 20th. And then we will have lunch at Mr. Barbecue the next afternoon.
Yeah, we always look forward to that.
Yes.
I
got to reach for my can of Cheerwine here. There we go. And I've got some Eastern North Carolina barbecue over there in the refrigerator. We're ready to go. But
North Carolina specialty there, Cheerwine.
All right, let's rock and roll here as we get FAIRtax Power Radio underway for another day. And actually, the Senate has been really busy here. If you go to congress.gov, put the words Internal Revenue Code in quotes in the search bar at the top. And as of the day we're recording this, 1,847 hits on that search, most of which, at least at the top of the list when you order it by newest to oldest, come from the Senate. Including this one at the top of the list is S4965, a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code to make the credit for small employer pension plan startup costs and the retirement auto enrollment credit, make those available to tax-exempt eligible small employers. Isn't that cool?
That is.
It is. Well,
in the tax code.
Let me get through this one fairly quickly because I want to get into the IRS outrages that Boortz and Linder talk about. They're incredible. S4934, 4934, bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code to create an above-the-line deduction for certain homeowner insurance premiums. That's kind of run-of-the-mill. S4933, this is a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code, get this, to clarify the tax-exempt controlled entity rules with respect to certain stock of government-sponsored enterprises. Do I need to read that one again?
No, just start the show all over.
Now, to clarify the tax-exempt controlled entity rules with respect to certain stock of government-sponsored enterprises. That is S4933. Thank you, Senator Jerry Moran from Kansas, for that little gem. S4931, a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code to provide credits for the production of renewable chemicals and investments in renewable chemical production facilities, and your favorite, or other purposes. That's Senator Brown of Ohio. And I got one more here before we can get into the goodies today. This is S4915, 4915, a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code to modify the low-income housing credit and to reauthorize and reform the generalized system of preferences and for other purposes. You cannot have that without without that in your tax code. That is Senator Cantwell from Washington. So the senators have been busy this week messing with the tax code more so than the House. But I tell you what,
early, didn't they? They left out right at the beginning of April, back right at the beginning of August, didn't they? They've gone. They're not in it.
Well, they may be. I don't pay attention to them any more than I have to, but we do like to look at Congress.gov every weekend here or every week on FAIRtax Power Radio and just show people what the Congress critters are doing to the tax code and make the point that all of this instability, all of this favoritism for one group or another, all of this garbage, or as you call it, bowl of spaghetti, goes away with the fair tax when we pull, my favorite phrase, we pull the income tax code out by the roots and replace it with the fair tax, and all of these shenanigans go away. And then again, I can guarantee you there's a lobbyist behind about 98% of these proposals to change the tax code.
Agreed. Agree. Totally agree with that, for sure.
So that is how we're going. All right, let's get back into it. We have been going for the past several weeks here on FAIRtax Power Radio, and we will do this one more episode. This is our next to last episode going through the FAIRtax book. The original 2005 book written by Neil Boortz got his name in big print there at Linder, kind of down there a little smaller. So we know who has the more powerful agent, don't we?
Well, who ended up, making the cover for sure.
Yeah, it is. But chapter 4.
Let me take a second. Neil Boortz was on the radio in Atlanta. And of course, Representative John Linder was an Atlanta congressman from one of the districts down there. And back in the early 2000s, they both came together and it was a wonderful relationship. And Boortz had, at that time, a national audience on his daily radio program. And there was a considerable amount of excitement and discussion about the fair tax. Now, fast forward to where we are now. We're not on a national radio network per se. Mm-hmm. The internet is there that wasn't there as developed as it is now back in the early to mid 2000s. And so here we have an opportunity between us and the folks that get on social media and make comments and discussions about the fair tax. And one thing I've noticed as we get ready to get into today's chapter from the FAIRtax book is that there are a lot of folks that are digging in and asking some really good questions. There are several question groups on Facebook, for example, where I noted here recently, a lot of folks are really looking at it and tearing it apart and asking some really good questions.
Yes.
We encourage our listeners and viewers here on the FAIRtax Power Radio Show to get involved in that, and especially in your communities.
Next week, chapter 15 of the FAIRtax book is questions and objections that Boortz and Linder ran into at the time they wrote this. We'll get into that as well. But of course, if you've got a question or possibly an objection you'd like addressed, leave it in the comments. We'll go to work on that one. But let's dig into chapter 14, income tax outrages. We have mentioned a good number of these on FAIRtax Power Radio over the course of the program. But the first one that Boortz and Linder get into, and I'm going to read a good bit of this, just will make you say, are you kidding me? Does the IRS really do that? On March 22nd, 1985, the Associated Press sent a story down the wires, headline, "The IRS tries to penalize a chemical company $46,000 for being a dime short." The so-called offender here was a company called Roman Haas of Philadelphia. They make chemicals, do everything from keeping fruits fresh to fighting disease. They also own the Morton Salt brand, or did at that time. It is a large enough company that in 1983, they sent a check to the IRS in payment of payroll taxes, what was held back from their employees' paychecks, and sent those payroll taxes in. That check that they sent to the IRS was $4,488,112.88. The problem is they actually owed $4,488,112 $488,112.98. The check was 10 cents short. So, did the IRS call and ask for their dime like any reasonable businessman would? Are you kidding me? This is the IRS. It's penalty time. They sent a letter telling them that they now owed $46,806.37 in penalties for being a dime short on remitting their payroll taxes. It took many months, no small amount spent on legal fees to get the IRS to drop the penalty. And we do believe they eventually got their dime.
Well, they were trying to get it plus the 46,000 in penalties too, $46,800 in penalties. And that's the thing. You get triggered by deadline missed on reporting, extensions, quarterly payments, you name it, and they're all about imposing those penalties. And they say, well, we'll do away with the interest, but we're going to have to get those penalties.
Yeah, give you imagine a $46,000 penalty for being 10 cents short on a check that they owe. That is just there's no word for it. I'm trying to come up with one, and there's just really no word for that. That is beyond insane.
It's nothing, no word that you can use on a family program like this one.
Yeah, but that's the kind of garbage that goes away with the fair tax. When you pay your taxes voluntarily because you voluntarily chose to buy something, that's when you pay your taxes under the fair tax. There is no IRS. There are no agents. There are no penalties for being late because the fair tax is completely anonymous. They have no idea, who's paying what when. They just, the vendors send the paycheck, send the tax revenue into the state revenue departments. It's all over. And we don't get this kind of stuff. Now, the next story that's here in chapter 14 of the FAIRtax book, this one has kind of a tragedy attached to it. I will let you dive into that one, sir, if you've got it there on your Kindle or whatever.
Yeah, the story of Alex and Kay Counsel shows the tragic links to which an honest citizen can be driven by IRS enforcement actions. In the late 1970s, an insurance executive named Alex Counsel received a sizable bonus at work, got involved in a tax shelter. His tax accountant told him it was a legitimate option, but the IRS disagreed with that. Counsel's liability for taxes due on the bonus expired at the end of 3 years. Nonetheless, after the statute of limitations had expired, the Internal Revenue Service sent the counsels a notice demanding more than $180,000 in unpaid taxes on the bonus, a figure including fees and interest. The counsel's accountant notified the Internal Revenue Service that the statute of limitations had expired on the counsel's tax liability. 2 years later, the IRS wrote back to claim that they had 2 years later. 2 years later, the IRS wrote back to claim that they had mailed a certified letter to the counsels prior to the expiration of the statute notifying them of the deficiency. Okay, fair enough. Reading from the FAIRtax book, show us a copy of the certified letter and the receipt. No way. Not only did the IRS refuse to provide copies and a receipt for the letter, they wouldn't even tell the counsels where the letter had been sent until yet another 2 years have passed. We're now 4 years outside of the supposed expiration of the liability. Well, wouldn't you know it, when the IRS finally coughed up the address to which they supposedly had sent the delinquency notice, wait for it, wrong address. Now, you'd think this would pretty much be the end of things. By virtue of sending the notice to the wrong address, the IRS had failed to inform the counsels of their tax liability within the time allotted. And, well, that's not the way the IRS operates. When this matter found its way into the federal court system, the IRS informed the court that it was the counsel's responsibility to prove they hadn't received the notice. In other words, the counsels had to undertake the impossible task of proving a negative. Apparently, the innocent until proven guilty idea never really caught on with the tax collector. And as you might guess, the counsels couldn't prove that they didn't receive the notice, so the Internal Revenue Service slapped a lien on their construction business for almost $300,000. The lien destroyed Counsel's credit rating and his business collapsed. Shortly thereafter, Counsel left his wife the following letter: "My dearest Kay, I've taken my life in order to provide capital for you. The IRS and its liens, which have been taken against our property illegally by a runaway agency of our government, have dried up all sources of credit for us, so I have made the only decision I can. It's purely a business decision. I hope you can understand that. I love you completely, Alex. P.S. You will find my body on the north side of the house." Can you believe, I mean, the unrelenting, it's just hard to imagine that a business, that any part of any government, especially the human people, the people that are involved in that, they're looking at it from, well, we're the Internal Revenue Service, or we have these rules that we have to follow, and you weren't able to prove that you didn't receive how do you prove that you don't receive something like that?
You can't prove it. You can just say it. But I'll tell you what, that I would have to go along with the people who describe the Internal Revenue Service as a criminal enterprise. If I was Steve McGarrett on Hawaii 5-0, I'd say, book them, Dino, put the whole agency in jail. that is insane. That goes away with the fair tax.
To wrap this particular sad story up, the court threw out the IRS's claim against the Counsels, but Alex Counsel had taken his life, and the family was crushed.
Absolutely.
Business and we talk about this too on the show a lot. The mental anguish, the pressure on small business owners and just the common man and his family. He might be working for somebody else. Can you imagine the pressure that gets released when the fair tax is enacted, in terms of you're not having to deal with the Internal Revenue Service anymore, no more Publication 17, no more April 15th as far as federal taxes is concerned to deal with? I can't imagine why folks. I know why our congressmen don't want to get rid of the income tax, and I'm hoping and praying that our show here is resonating with some folks in terms of how really wonderful it would be without the income tax.
And there are two more stories here in Chapter 14 of the FAIRtax book about the income tax outrages. This one's pretty quick. Says you can even run afoul of the IRS by just trying to do something nice for somebody. Professional golfer Lee Trevino once had a caddy who needed open heart surgery but didn't have any health insurance, and so Trevino generously offered to cover the cost of the surgery for his caddy, but that didn't sit too well with the IRS. They wanted their ounce of flesh as well. So not only did Trevino cover the cost of his caddy's surgery, he had to write a check to the IRS in payment of a gift tax. They considered that a gift. So the IRS slapped Trevino with a gift tax to boot. Just another entry into the list of examples that show that no good deed goes unpunished. The last story here in this chapter is a really good one. It involves Boortz himself. So this is going to be good. Have at it.
Yeah, you're probably wondering whether your humble authors, Neil Boortz and Dr. John Linder, have any personal experiences of mistreatment from the Internal Revenue Service. The co-author, in this case, Boortz, who is John Linder, elected official of the people, turns out happens to be squeaky clean when it comes to tax matters. He could think of nothing that might interest the reader. The co-author, who is an attorney and a talk show host, Neil Boortz, on the other hand, labors under no such limitations. So here in his words is the story of yet another IRS outrage. Neil Boortz. It was in the mid-1980s. My accountant surprised me with the news that I owed the Internal Revenue Service about $50,000 with the filing of my return. That was $50,000 I didn't have. I knew that not filing was a crime, so I filed without paying the $50,000 and then immediately contacted the IRS and asked to speak to an agent. I told him of my situation. He agreed to work with me over a period of a year to cover the remainder of my tax liability. Several months later, I settled a rather large case on which I was paid a contingency fee large enough to allow me to satisfy my outstanding balance with the IRS. I called the local IRS office to speak to the agent who had been working with me. Another agent came on the line to tell me that the agent with whom I'd been working had been reassigned and that she would be handling my case instead. The conversation went like this. Mr. Smith has been working with me on my past due taxes, I began. I have the money to pay the entire balance due right now. I need to know what the total is. Well, Mr. Boortz, why haven't you paid your taxes before now? Because I didn't have the money. Couldn't you have borrowed the money? Excuse me, ma'am, said Boortz. Does it really matter why I haven't paid? I have the money now and I want to go to the bank, get a cashier's check and run it over to you right now. Today, this afternoon, all I need to know is how much I owe. Well, I want to know why you haven't paid before now, said the IRS agent. Like I told you, I didn't have the money. The IRS agent replied, well, you could have sold something to pay your taxes. Me or John Boortz, Neil Boortz, this is rather ridiculous, isn't it? Here I am asking you for a figure so that I can bring certified funds over to you right now and you won't have give it to me. So don't you have a legal obligation to tell a taxpayer how much money he owes when he requests information? You ready? I'll get back to you. That's the IRS agent. Well, with that, the lovely Sandra hung up. I waited for her to call back with a figure, but never heard back. I made a note to call her back the next morning and headed home. Early the next morning, my secretary rushed into my office to tell me that the lobby was full of IRS agents demanding to see me. I walked into my lobby to see the lovely Sandra, accompanied by 3 gun-toting special agents. When I invited them back to my office, Sandra stepped up to my desk and slapped a notice of seizure down in front of me. We're seizing your office building due to your failure to pay your income taxes. She turned on her heel, let it run for a while, and turned it off. Then she stomped out of the office. The armed agents looked embarrassed. One of them actually winked at me and shrugged his. The entire matter was settled in hours. I finally got the payoff figure, delivered the certified funds, and the seizure was canceled. So why did our friend Sandra refuse to give me the payoff figure over the phone? Why did she serve me with a notice of seizure the next morning? Simple. To make herself look good in the eyes of her superiors. Sandra would gain no particular glory with her supervisors by simply quoting a payoff figure over the phone and accepting a check. It would be far more impressive to go to her superiors and tell them something like, yeah, so I'm going through the files and I find this Neil Boortz guy. He owes more than $50,000 and nobody's even filed a lien. So I slap a seizure notice on his office building and wouldn't you know it, he's over here with a check in 3 hours. We're told that on occasion, IRS agents get a bonus for a collection following a seizure. Not a bad little racket. We could go hours detailing abuses that have happened at the hands of the IRS, but our goal in this book is to promote the fair tax, not run down the IRS. That from
but that's so much fun. Running down the IRS. We'll get back to that here on FAIRtax Power Radio when we're done with going through the book here. But,
yeah. Well, I mean, you think about it. You think about all the technology and everything that businesses run on at the speed of light now, instantaneously through banks and other transactions and inter-business transactions that take place financially. It happens just immediately because the Internal Revenue Service is still running on DOS 1.0. It makes it a little different. And I say that facetiously, but not really. But it makes it difficult for the common man or a man in business or even an operator of a single business, a single proprietorship to make these things happen. And again, we always go back to think about it. What would you do with the time, Mr. Businessman, mother, father, family business? What would you do with the time that you didn't have to spend dealing with the Internal Revenue Service. How could you change your community? How could you be, how could you do things better yourself for your company, innovation and things like that? So, I mean, you look at those stories that we just told you about that are in the FAIRtax book from Neil Boortz and Representative John Linder. And you have to know that there's light at the end of our tunnel, and it's not a train coming our way.
Oh, mercy. I tell you what, this is just, and you'll hear people tell you, oh, let's get rid of the Internal Revenue Service by implementing a flat tax that everybody can do their taxes on a postcard. Well, if you do that, who do you send the postcard to? The Internal Revenue Service. Don't be fooled. A flat tax is still a tax on income. A flat tax will not stay flat for long. A flat tax still requires withholding. A flat tax still requires the Internal Revenue Service. Getting rid of the Internal Revenue Service, the only way to do it is to get rid of the income tax or get rid of any income taxes that the IRS would be charged with administering and enforcing. Right. Place it all with a fair tax. That is the only way that you get rid of the Internal Revenue Service, is you replace the tax collection and enforcement agency from the federal level IRS to the state level departments of revenue, many of which have been collecting a state level sales tax for decades. They know how to do it. They know how to find the people that are cheating. They just, everything is so much better when the states do it rather than the federal government. And getting rid of the income tax, replacing it with the fair tax, gets rid of those kind of horror stories that Boortz and Linder detailed in chapter 14 of the FAIRtax book. And it just doesn't make sense to keep the income tax when we've got such a much better, a much easier, a much more efficient, a much less intrusive, a much less invasive, much less error prone, a much less fraud prone, a much less evasion prone system in the fair tax than we have with the current income tax. And we just got to sit on the Congress critters' faces and make them give us what we need here.
And the other side of that too is, it takes a while to turn a boat, a ship the size of the U.S. Treasury with regard to funding.
Look what happened when they tried to turn the Titanic and they couldn't quite get it in time.
Just nicked it by that much.
Yeah, and look what happened. Oh well. Anyway, that's I'm afraid that's going to wrap up this edition of FAIRtax Power Radio.
Yeah, that's right. We're not trying to beat the Bismarck or anything like that. But we have an opportunity to go back to a time where our country, where the citizenry has the ability to say, okay, I think I'll pay my taxes today. And you go buy whatever it is that you need. New goods and services, used goods and services don't get taxed. And the other thing about it too is education is not a taxable event inside of the fair tax, which is phenomenal. I think that is just an absolute goldmine of opportunity for young people to take care of getting an education at whatever level they want to, wherever they want to, and not a dime of money transacting is taxable.
All right. Well, we have run slap out of time again for this edition of FAIRtax Power Radio. Thank you so much for watching, listening, and sharing the videos. We certainly appreciate that. Until we meet again, I'm Bob Paxton.
I'm Bob. You
want to run that by me again?
I'm Bob Scarborough.
Oh, I didn't know who you were. Okay, we are the FAIRtax Guys, providing you the fair tax is the only truly fair tax. And once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
So tell me, how could I pay less taxes?
Less?
Yeah, I'm trying to get ahead, so how can I pay less?
Well, I suppose you could pay less taxes by earning less money, or you could give to charity.
How is that going to help?
Actually, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but if you know the right people, okay, or if you have a really good lawyer, you can usually get around the big ones.
If I may, under the fair tax, to pay less taxes, you would simply consume less. You would control how much you pay and when you pay your taxes simply by choosing what you purchase and when you purchase something.
So I could Stay focused and get ahead.